and a Star Wars Day, as in May the 4th, be with you. Anyway, that aside, that just reminds me that perhaps this is the time when the Rebel Alliance here in Scotland should unite against the evil empire. And no sooner had I really thought about that than I realised that Kenny McCaskill appears to have started that kind of move off already. It was revealed yesterday in various X posts that Mr McCaskill has penned a letter to the First Minister, Mr Swinney. And in this letter, he suggested that there ought to be a summit of all the pro-independence party leaders in Scotland. And he's invited Mr Swinney to announce just such a summit. Now, you may recall that Mr Swinney's already staged several events, one of which was called a summit, which was aimed primarily at stifling the far right and its rise to prominence in the UK. Now, its rise to prominence in the UK is very unlikely to move the electoral arithmetic in the next Holyrood elections. So it's largely a symbolic act. I mean, Mr Swinney is very obviously preaching to the converted when he says that Scotland really doesn't like Nigel Farage and is unlikely to produce any meaningful seat numbers particularly for Mr Farage's party. However, what has happened is that most of the polling suggests that Labour has lost a lot of votes to Reform, but the Tory vote itself in the rest of the UK, i.e. England, has totally collapsed, and everybody who was previously planning to vote for the Tory party next is now saying they're going to vote for Reform. And we have actually seen that starting to happen in local council elections in England, which bizarrely have not used the type of voting system that we have here in Scotland, the proportional system. They've still used first past the post, and that has allowed Nigel Farage's party to gain council seats, among other things, in a bizarre switch over from Tories or Labour to Reform. But there isn't really any danger of that affecting the electoral arithmetic in Scotland, far less affecting the number of people who want to vote for independence. So for Mr Swinney to organise a summit on that seems a little bit pointless. However, what Mr McCaskill is suggesting in his letter, I think, is a good idea. Kenny McCaskill, I thought, was very conciliatory in the language he used in the letter. He invited John, who's an old friend after all, and both he and Mr McCaskill both served in the administrations of Alex Salmond, and they largely must have enjoyed the process and the success they had in 2014 in raising the independence vote all the way up to 51% before the United Kingdom cheated again and reduced it back to 45%, according to the media. However, what Mr McCaskill is suggesting is that because he and John Swinney know each other and they're old friends, why not have this pro-independence party summit, where Mr Swinney, who is obviously the First Minister and is quite entitled to launch summits of this kind, would organise a sit-down with Kenny McCaskill of Alba and with Colette Walker of the ISP and whoever is left in charge of the Green Party and any other smaller parties actually who are pro-independence, such as the Scottish Socialist Party. But anyway, the idea would be to sit down and to agree, as Mr McCaskill suggests, a common approach to the 2026 general elections here in Scotland. Mr McCaskill is suggesting that the common approach should be that all four of the pro-independence parties should agree that the goal of their parties in general is going to be an agreed one where all of these four parties perhaps agree to a single goal and a single statement on their manifesto, which is that this next general election in 2026 will be a de facto referendum. It will demonstrate the true level of support for independence across Scotland. Now, having said that, it would be a largely symbolic effort because a de facto referendum, so far as I can see, has never been used, effectively anyway, to achieve independence from the United Kingdom. It's normal for countries which have basically removed themselves from the United Kingdom after being colonised for decades or centuries, being exploited, to just simply vote for politicians who actually do declare independence. But I'm not sure if Mr Swinney would go that far, but perhaps there is a lot to be said for having all four parties agree that independence in this way, this de facto demonstration of the people's actual intent, is a good way of measuring actual support. And if we produce a victory for pro-independence parties, especially using the weird mixture of first past the post and the default system of allocating seats in the second vote in our elections, we might actually produce a pro-independence majority in a kind of coalition. Now, he's not used the word coalition, he's certainly not used the word pact, but a common approach to independence which all four parties agree in advance. Now, that should mean that largely parties which are not capable or do not have the wherewithal to stand in the first past the post general election can leave that to the larger parties who do, and concentrate all their efforts on the second vote and getting as many list seats as possible. And that would seem a perfectly reasonable proposition, given the facts that, you know, smaller parties just don't have the money to do the kind of work which larger parties can. Now, I know you're saying, well, the SNP is pretty skint at the moment as well, but it does have a lot more heft than the smaller parties like the ISP and possibly the SSP and the Greens even. The Greens are a bit of a muddle at the moment. I don't really know where they stand on independence, and I don't think anyone else does either. But such a summit as Mr McCaskill is proposing would certainly bring them out of the woodwork, and they would have to declare whether for it or against it. However, I digress. The other piece of news which crossed my feed recently was, of course, the very successful march conducted by All Under One Banner through the streets of Glasgow yesterday. Now, they got a perfect day for it, which is terrific, and for the first march of the campaigning season, according to the best estimates, the numbers involved were in excess of 5,000. However, the BBC, in typical fashion, said several hundred people turned up, which is not a complete lie. 5,000 people is several hundred, it's just several tens of hundreds, that's all. So the BBC, as usual, is trying to minimise this as much as possible, as are the mainstream newspapers. And the mainstream newspapers and the BBC are also bigging up the Orange Order, which is planning to hold another march next weekend in Glasgow as well. Bizarre thing about this Orange Order march is its reason for being held is supposedly to celebrate the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day. Now, despite the fact that I believe that the Victory in Europe Day's 80th anniversary is worth celebrating, is the Orange Order the kind of organisation you want to be leading a march celebrating VE Day? Let's face it, the Orange Order here in Scotland, particularly prevalent here in the Central Belt and the west of Scotland, is largely based on anti-Catholicism and the celebration of a history which is foreign to most of us here in Scotland, but which involves the annexing of the 6 counties of Northern Ireland in the partition of Ireland. I think it was 1922. Now, having said all that, what's going to happen with the Orange Order? Well, the Orange Order is capable of rallying, they claim, about 10,000 people to this march. But are there actually 10,000 members of the Orange Order in Scotland who are able to get to such a march? And I would question that. In the past, the Orange Order has invited, I think is the way they would say, other lodges from Northern Ireland to come and take part as well, since they're making this about a British victory over the Nazis. That could involve Orange Orders from anywhere in the UK. So my guess is that the Orange Order in Scotland itself will not be able to field 10,000 marchers, as they claim, and will have to import quite a lot of them from other places, most notably, I suppose, Northern Ireland, which is a bit weird. Having people walking down your streets wearing orange sashes, business suits, carrying black bumbershoot and wearing bowler hats is basically a kind of pantomime of being an English businessman in London, but wearing a sash, which is odd, really, when you think about it. Celebration of everything London and British, in the streets of Glasgow, which is largely, or was until recently, largely a hotbed of leftist socialism for all intents and purposes. If you just remember back to 1919, at the end of World War I, when the streets of Glasgow were full of shipyard workers, tens of thousands of them protesting that they wanted a 40-hour working week and wanted some holidays, only to be faced by Churchill's machine guns and tanks in George Square. However, it's not going to be machine guns and tanks in George Square this time, just these guys in bowler hats and sashes with umbrellas, marching, I suppose, in their usual gallus fashion through the streets, proclaiming how British they are and how wonderful Britain is. But does the rest of Glasgow feel the same? I don't really think so, and I certainly don't think the rest of Scotland feels anything like as enthusiastic as the Orange Order does. Just by the way, there was a post attributed to Nigel Farage just yesterday, which I saw, which made me laugh. Farage is actually suggesting that all schools, including those in Scotland, and especially those in Scotland, should teach young children to love the British state, the British Empire, and to view the British Empire as having done more good than harm over the period that it occupied countless other nations of the world and exploited them and enslaved their people. Farage is really, I mean, how do you describe a man who wants to teach children that bad is good and that invading and occupying other countries is doing them good, other than somebody like Nigel Farage? He's also telling us that he's going to increase taxes, he's going to cut benefits, he has probably decided he wants to abolish a whole lot of other benefits which would help people who desperately need it, but instead of that he's going to cut those and give tax cuts to businesses, which is great if you're a far-right Tory, not so great if you happen to be somebody working for a far-right Tory. But anyway, the upshot here is that on this day, the day of Star Wars, May the 4th, is the time when the Rebel Alliance would basically gather together and prepare to battle the evil empire. And I think a day like this is the day that we should do the same. It remains to be seen whether John Swinney is prepared to make the tiny step of agreeing with Kenny McCaskill and holding the summit, which will involve the four main pro-independence parties in a leadership summit to agree something which, let's face it, nobody's going to agree on everything. But if all four of these parties agree on one thing, it's that independence is the goal for all four parties. It's just a case of how far they're prepared to go to get it and what the action is that's necessary to achieve it. But if all four are working in their own ways and trying not to step on each other's feet and making sure that there is a pro-independence majority government in Scotland, even if it's an alliance between all four or three or even two of them, then it's worth doing, because apart from anything else, it gives us independence supporters a little bit of a sense of pride that we actually are in a majority in Scotland, and that watching thousands of people in bowler hats and sashes marching through our streets in a foreign sort of demonstration of overwhelming imperial power isn't going to impress us. Anyway, that's about it for me today. I just thought it was worth saying something about what's happening at the moment. I would like to encourage Mr Swinney, please accept Kenny McCaskill's very kind and I think very polite offer to sit down and discuss how all four parties should approach the independence question in the election of 2026. Anyway, that's, as I say, about it from Inde-Car today. I'd like to just say to everybody who's been trying to donate to my channel, there are some problems sometimes with PayPal or using PayPal as a way of collecting funds. And so some of your repeated attempts to make regular payments have failed. If you're finding that payments that you set up as recurring payments are no longer happening, please double check. And if necessary, just go through the steps to register again. At the moment, I have a tiny request from all of you, those of you who are able to make a donation. At the moment, I'm trying to raise somewhere between 60 and 80 pounds, a tiny amount of money, just to see me through the next week or two. At the moment, funds are low and people are getting discouraged, and I understand that, and I don't like begging for money, but it's necessary for me to get something, even if it's just a few quid a week, to keep this show ticking over. So I appreciate everything that people do when they make donations, and I'm especially appreciative of those who really can't afford it, who are making regular payments of small sums. Please, if you can afford it, but only if you can afford it, please make a donation. In the meantime, as I always say, keep the faith. If Mr Swinney is anything like the man that he was when he and Kenny McCaskill worked together under Alex Salmond, if he's anything like that man today, then surely this is an invitation that he should take up. That's it from Inde-Car today. I'll see you later in the week, and thanks for watching. Bye for now.